Yeah, okay.
So, okay, everybody missed the opening prayer, but we're getting into the word now. So Isaiah chapter 18. I'm just going to read it, all 7 verses of it, and we'll go back and pick it apart a little bit. Alas, O land of whirring wings, which lies beyond the rivers of Cush, which sends envoys by the sea, even in papyrus vessels on the surface of the waters. Go, swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth, to a people feared far and wide, a powerful and oppressive nation, whose land the rivers divide. All you inhabitants of the world and dwellers on earth, as soon as a standard is raised on the mountains, you will see it. And as soon as the trumpet is blown, you will hear it. For thus Yahweh has told me, I will look from my dwelling place quietly, like dazzling heat in the sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. For before the harvest, as soon as the bud blossoms and the flower becomes a ripening grape, then he will cut off the sprigs with pruning knives and remove and cut away the spreading branches. They will be left together for mountain birds of prey and for the beasts of the earth. And the birds of prey will spend the summer feeding on them, and all the beasts of the earth will spend harvest time on them. At that time, a gift of homage will be brought to Yahweh of hosts from a people tall and smooth, even from a people feared far and wide, a powerful and oppressive nation whose land the rivers divide, to the place of the name of Yahweh of hosts, even Mount Zion. So chapter 17 started with judgment on Damascus, but then we saw that Israel was lumped in with that because they had yoked themselves to Damascus. So with Syria, with Arameans, and therefore they're going to be caught up in the same judgment. And now quickly, the focus shifts to the land of Cush, also known as Ethiopia, then in the ancient world, and really now it's modern Sudan and Somalia. That's the area that we're talking about in Africa. And this oracle describes a distant land that is desperately sending out envoys to find allies. See, the Assyrians are harassing them too, and they're looking for help against the Assyrians. The Assyrians are trying to conquer the whole known world, and they're freaking out, and they're worried where their help is going to come from. So they're looking for help against the Assyrians. So he says, alas, O land of whirring wings, which lies beyond the rivers of Cush. So alas, or that's a Hebrew interjection that expresses pity or sympathy or disappointment, and is often translated, we see it as woe, W-O-E, woe. Woe to those who do this, woe to those who do that. Well, woe to this land of whirring wings. And that's a reference to the Nile Valley, and it's swarms of insects. Because sometimes when the insects are swarming, all you can hear is the buzzing of the wings. It's so intense, and the swarms are so thick that all you could hear were the wings. So the rivers of Cush, these are in East Africa, southern Egypt, northern Sudan, possibly the headwaters of the Nile. Remember, the Nile flows from south to north instead of north to south. There's not many rivers that do that. I think there might be 3 that do that, but the Nile is one that flows from south to north. This land, verse 2, which sends envoys by the sea, even in papyrus vessels on the surface of the waters. Go, swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth, to a people feared far and wide, a powerful and oppressive nation whose land the rivers divide. So sending envoys by sea, these are, again, ambassadors who were looking for help in their rebellion against Assyria. They're in the same boat as everybody else, literally, in these vessels of papyrus. These are boats that were made from bundles of papyrus reeds that they commonly used on the Nile River. They were light, they were fast. These vessels probably also used in the Red Sea. and they chose to travel this way by sea and not by land. It just shows that the urgency of their mission. They wanted to go as the crow flies, so to speak, and just head straight over there instead of taking the route around the Red Sea by land, or they wanted to head straight to go seek for help. So these swift messengers, they were traveling light, they were traveling fast in these papyrus boats. It was urgent. But Isaiah's message to them, go home. Go home and go home fast. Turn tail, get out of here. Their mission may have been politically important to them, but it was spiritually inappropriate. It wasn't the time. There was no help to be found. Go home. He's respectful to the envoys. He doesn't put them down. He makes note of their military prowess. These they're people feared far and wide. They're powerful. He doesn't disrespect them in any way, and he knows their reputation as well as their impressive appearance. They were tall, they were clean-shaven people, fierce warriors, but the message is still the same. Yeah, you're really impressive, but go home. Turn around, go home. Verse 3, all you inhabitants of the world and the dwellers on the earth, as soon as a standard is raised on the mountains, you will see it. And as soon as the trumpet is blown, you will hear it. So this is the universal application of this message that the messengers were received. The whole world was going to know. The whole world was going to shake at the trumpet blast that announced when Assyria was taken down. And this wasn't the time for Assyria to be taken down. And everybody would know when they were, but this wasn't it. The banner and the trumpet addressed, the eye in the ear, represents the call to rally for battle. You see the banner, you hear the trumpet. So there's no ambiguity there. You know when it's time for. When the banner is raised and when the trumpet goes out, you'll know it's time. Just like when Jesus comes back, right? He said, listen, you're not going to need anybody to tell you. You're going to know. You're going to know. And in the meantime, if anybody says, here he is, or there he is, or he's over here, he's over there, don't listen to them because they're not telling you the truth. You're going to know. Everybody's going to know. You won't need an interpreter. For thus, verse 4, for thus Yahweh has told me, I will look from my dwelling place quietly, like dazzling heat in the sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. So this is the picture of God, right? Silently, unexpectedly, he's just waiting for the right moment to bring about his inevitable judgment. He's not threatened. He's not rushing. 26, Isaiah 26:21 says, for behold, Yahweh is about to come out from his place to punish the inhabitants of the earth for their iniquity. And the earth will reveal her bloodshed and will no longer cover her slain. It's all in God's timing. He's not going to be rushed. He's not going to be hurried. He's not threatened by anything that's going on. He's not, chewing his nails and say, oh no, plan A didn't work. What's my plan B? God doesn't need plan B. So it's a message for then and the future. Again, God's not threatened. He doesn't need to rush. And it's an encouragement to see things from God's perspective, to learn to adopt an attitude of quiet faith instead of trusting the world's powers. Trust God. What has he already said? What does his word say? Trust and wait. Listen to the voice of the Spirit. Now we have his Holy Spirit as a benefit. We don't have to get all riled up about the things that are going on around us. As a matter of fact, we are not to, but we do. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 1 through 4 says, Simon Peter, chapter 1. a bondservant and apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who have received a faith of the same kind as ours, by the righteousness of our God and Savior, Jesus Christ. Grace and peace be multiplied to you in the knowledge of God and of Jesus our Lord, seeing that his divine power has granted to us everything pertaining to life and godliness through the true knowledge of him who called us by his own glory and excellence. For by these he has granted to us his precious and magnificent promises, so that by them you may become partakers of the divine nature, having escaped the corruption that is in the world by lust. So we have his promises. We know Jesus is returning. We have the prophecies. We have everything that we need. We've been told about. We don't have to get alarmed when we see these things that Jesus warned us about happening. And as a matter of fact, he said, don't be alarmed and don't be deceived, but look up, for your redemption draws near. So it's our attitude, it makes all the difference in the world. And when we know the word and we're solid in it and we're resting in it and we're resting in that peace that comes from him, we don't have to get alarmed and freaked out. Verse 5, for before the harvest, as soon as the bud blossoms and the flower becomes a ripening grape, then he will cut off the sprigs with pruning knives and remove and cut away the spreading branches. So again, we've got these agricultural terms, and everything has to grow in its season at the right time. Things have to develop. First you have to have the bud blossom, and then you get the flower, and then the flower becomes the grape. Everything happens in its season, in its proper time, and we just wait for it. We wait for it. God is waiting for it. He knows his perfect time when his full plan of salvation unfolds. So what does this mean here for this prophecy? Assyria had a purpose from God. Assyria was God's instrument to bring judgment not only upon Israel and Judah, but upon that Mediterranean region. Assyria was God's chosen instrument to bring that judgment. Just like the Nation of Islam is God's chosen instrument now to bring judgment, especially to the Western Christianized world and still to Israel. They're his chosen instrument to bring his judgment. And it's going to come to pass, and it's going to come to fulfillment, and then he's going to deal with them. Same thing with Assyria. He's going to deal with them. But they have something to accomplish before God cuts them off. They would first be used again to punish Israel by taking them captive. But again, once God's purposes had been accomplished, God is going to intervene and cut them off. He did it with Assyria. He did it with Babylon. He did it with the Medo-Persians. He did it with the Greeks. He did it with the Romans. He did it with the Germans. He's done it with everybody throughout history. They're raised up for a purpose, but they always go beyond what God has called them to do in their wickedness, and he turns around and then he judges them. So just like, again, when they, like the grapes, were beginning to ripen, to extend their empire, the Assyrian Empire was about to take off, then they would be wiped out and God would take them down. He wouldn't let them expand any farther than they had. So they had their season and it was over. And they will be left together for mountain birds of prey and for the beasts of the earth. Verse 6, and the birds of prey will spend the summer feeding on them, and all the beasts of the earth will spend harvest time on them. So death really here is behind this harvest metaphor. The dead would and will become carrion for the wild animals. These are pictures of battle and what's going to happen to the Assyrians. And we see a lot of these pictures. Matthew 24, Jesus talks about it in the Olivet Discourse. Matthew 24, 28. 27 says, for just as the lightning comes from the east and flashes even to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. And wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather. But immediately after the tribulation of those days, again, this sounds like Jesus isn't talking about a pre-trib rapture here. The sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. And then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. And he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. Revelation 19. Revelation 19:17. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and he cried out with a loud voice, saying to all the birds which fly in mid-heaven, come, assemble for the great supper of God, so that you may eat the flesh of kings, and the flesh of commanders, and the flesh of mighty men, and the flesh of horses, and of those who sit on them, and the flesh of all men, both free men and slaves, the small and the great. So this is it's a picture. This, when the Assyrians go down, it'd be the same thing when the Babylonians went down. The same thing at the end when Jesus returns. These things, these judgments are types or foreshadows of the final judgment when Jesus returns. Even right within the book of Isaiah in chapter 46, verse 9. Remember the former things long past. For I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is no one like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times things which have not been done, saying my purpose will be established, and I will accomplish all my good pleasure. Calling a bird of prey from the east, the man of my purpose from a far country, truly I have spoken, truly I will bring it to pass. I have planned it, surely I will do it. Listen to me, you stubborn-minded, who are far from righteousness. I bring near my righteousness. It is not far off, and my salvation will not delay. And I will grant salvation in Zion and my glory for Israel. It's all part of his plan of salvation. And again, the Hebrew word for salvation is, anybody remember? Yeshua. Yahweh is salvation. Verse 7. And at that time, a gift of homage will be brought to Yahweh of hosts from a people tall and smooth, even from a people feared far and wide, a powerful and oppressive nation whose land the rivers divide, to the place of the name of Yahweh of hosts, even Mount Zion. So there will be a time for Cush, Ethiopia, Sudan, Somalia, whatever you want to call them, along with the other nations, all the world powers will one day bring tribute to Yahweh in Jerusalem. All the world powers. Now, since tribute payment was a symbol of subjugation and surrender, the nations will ultimately acknowledge Yahweh's sovereignty by bringing him tribute. And this tribute would be paid to the most powerful king as a way of avoiding punishment in the form of an invasion and attack. And of course, this is when the nations turn to Jesus, and they come when he's on his throne in the millennial kingdom, and they come and they pay tribute to Jesus and come and worship the one true king. So this is Yahweh of hosts, or Yahweh of armies, from Mount Zion, which is Yahweh's dwelling place, which is the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. This is a picture of Zechariah 14. I love how this all works together. Zechariah 14, verse 9. Oh, I need a drink before I read this one. and Yahweh will be king over all the earth. In that day, Yahweh will be the only one, and his name the only one. All the land will be changed into a plain from Gibeah to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem. But Jerusalem will rise and remain on its site from Benjamin's gate as far as the place of the first gate to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the king's wine presses. People will live in it, and there will no longer be a curse, for Jerusalem will dwell in security. Now this will be the plague with which Yahweh will strike all the peoples who have gone to war against Jerusalem. Some people say this looks like a nuclear holocaust. Their flesh will rot while they stand on their feet, and their eyes will rot in their sockets, and their tongue will rot in their mouth. It will come about in that day. Again, that's in that day, that's the end times, that's the return of Christ again, that a great panic from Yahweh will fall on them, and they will seize one another's hand, and the hand of one will be lifted against the hand of another. Judah also will fight at Jerusalem, and the wealth of all the surrounding nations will be gathered, gold and silver and garments in great abundance. So also, like this plague, will be the plague on the horse, the mule, the camel, the donkey, and all the cattle that will be in those camps. Then it will come about that any who are left of all the nations that went against Jerusalem will go up from year to year to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, and to celebrate the Feast of Booths. And it will be that whichever of the families of the earth does not go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, Yahweh of hosts, there will be no rain on them. If the family of Egypt does not go up or enter, then no rain will fall on them. It will be the plague with which Yahweh smites the nations who do not go up to celebrate the Feast of Booths. This will be the punishment of Egypt and the punishment of all the nations who do not go up to celebrate the Feast of Booths. In that day, there will be inscribed on the bells of the horses, holy to Yahweh. And the cooking pots in Yahweh's house will be like the bowls before the altar. Every cooking pot in Jerusalem and in Judah will be holy to Yahweh of hosts, and all who sacrifice will come and take of them and boil in them. And there will be no longer be a Canaanite in the house of Yahweh of hosts in that day. So in Ezekiel, you get near the end of Ezekiel, and it shows that there's a restoration of temple services, of the Levitical priesthood, of the sacrifices. And again, the sacrifices aren't for salvation. They're not forgiveness of sins, and they never have been. It's teaching the people how to worship. So we get to the end of Ezekiel, you guys do pretty soon. You're clipping through that pretty good. You'll see that. But that's never for forgiveness of sin and never for salvation. And it never was. So moving on to chapter 19. Egypt is in the crosshairs now. And there are no breaks in this chapter, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. We'll just start going through one verse at a time. So the oracle concerning Egypt. Behold, Yahweh is riding on a swift cloud and is about to come to Egypt. The idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence, and the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. So again, this, when it says this oracle concerning, and then fill in the blanks, here it's Egypt. It's the typical heading for oracles, prophecies against the nations. Oracle concerning Egypt. So we have this picture of Yahweh riding on a swift cloud. Of course, our English Bibles have written the Lord. The Septuagint version put Adonai in there. And a lot of times, Yeshua, God the Son, God the Father, they're interchangeable in a lot of these texts because Jesus said, I and the Father are one. And the physical manifestations of the Father are the Son. So, and we see this, we saw it in Daniel, right? The picture of the Son of Man coming on the clouds, coming on his chariot, the same chariot that you guys just saw him take off in Ezekiel chapter 1, coming back on that same throne chariot, riding on the clouds, bringing it's an attack on this on the ancient Near Eastern motif, where they called Baal the cloud rider. That's what they called him. So whenever God has a truth, the devil always plants a counterfeit. So all these titles, Baal just means husband and father. It was more of a title than a name. Yahweh was supposed to be Israel's Baal, God, father, husband. But instead, this other deity named Baal, who they worshipped, who was supposed to be the storm god and the cloud rider. So this really, when Isaiah says this and writes this is attack on their pagan beliefs, asserting Yahweh's superiority over Baal by taking over these titles. The storm god imagery. Baal has no authority over anything. Baal he's nothing. He's a lesser being. He's subject to Yahweh. Yahweh is the one who controls everything. Yahweh is the one who is sovereign over all, on the heavens and the earth and below the earth. And he's showing here that these small g gods are no match, and they're just counterfeit for the one true God. So this is a picture of Yahweh arriving in Egypt to judge in the fury and splendor of the true Semitic storm god. You want a storm? I'll bring you a storm. So they're speaking of the idols of Egypt. And the purpose of the oracles against these nations, again, was to assert the dominance of Yahweh over the gods that were worshipped by the other nations. They were no gods. And we'll see Isaiah many times throughout this book mocking these other gods in these idols and these other so-called gods that these nations worshipped. They're nothing. They're nothing. They have no authority other than what God has allowed them. And really what we see here is Exodus part 2, the day when Jesus returns. Those plagues in Exodus can be mirrored in the judgments that we see in Revelation. They were a foreshadow of the judgments in Revelation. And these are the judgments really that are being talked about here, that were foreshadowed when the Egyptians were taken down by the Assyrians and the Babylonians. They were all foreshadows of the end of the final judgment. So again, what happened in the Exodus, where the plagues were sent to judge and expose the impotence really of the pagan gods, is going to happen again. Every single one of those judgments, those plagues in the Exodus, was attacking one of Egypt's gods. Every single one of them was exposing those gods as powerless against Yahweh, including their biggest one, their head god, Ra, the sun god. And God just shut the lights off. Ra has no authority here. And Pharaoh was supposed to be their protector, and the son of Ra, and he was unable to protect his people because God killed every firstborn, man and beast, showing that Pharaoh's nothing either. He's not a god, he's just a man. So this is going to happen again. Verse 2, so I will incite Egyptians against Egyptians, and they will fight each other. They will each fight against his brother, each against his neighbor, city against city, and kingdom against kingdom. I just saw this. What did Jesus say in the Olivet Discourse, right? There'll be wars, rumors of wars, nation rising against nation, which meant really ethnon rising up against ethnon, these individual ethnic groups rising up against one another. What do we have going on in our country now? What's going on in the Islamic world? When they say that their Allah is a God of peace, but they're killing one another in record numbers. We've got black on black murders in the inner city. We've got race riots. We've got all this stuff, and it's going on around the world. Ethnon versus ethnon, ethnic groups rising up against one another. Jesus said, don't be alarmed by this stuff. These are labor pains. It's the same thing in Egypt. Same thing here, city against city, kingdom against kingdom, ethnon against ethnon, the same thing. These are the picture, the same picture. So Egyptian civil war was prophesied, and they have had numerous civil wars, and they will have more civil war. This judgment against Egypt is going to be initiated from within, and they're going to be torn apart from the inside out. That's part of God's judgment against them. And if you look at all the major powers of the world, and we're next, they all crumble from the inside. They all rot from the inside. And it's mostly on moral issues. They just get corrupt from the inside out, and they just fall in on themselves, just like a rotted out tree that's got nothing left in it. It's just push it over. It's going to be the same thing. Same thing with Egypt. Of course, we read Egypt in the Old Testament. You can substitute the world. God's methods are the same. So again, destroyed from the inside out. Then the spirit of the Egyptians will be demoralized within them, and I will confound their strategy, so that they will resort to idols and ghosts of the dead, and to mediums and spiritists. So when their traditional means of receiving counsel fail, these are very superstitious people already, and they're already, we saw Pharaoh's magicians, his wizards, whatever you want to call them. The Egyptians are going to seek out supernatural advice from any source they can find it from. Every possible source that's out there, they would turn to those sources. Mediums, necromancers, that's an attempt to communicate with the spirits of the dead, to receive messages about the future, praying to dead people, just saying, is necromancy. It's the sin of necromancy. And this is outlawed by God. This is clearly outlawed by God in Deuteronomy 18. Might as well read it. Deuteronomy 18:11. I have to read 10. So there shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, one who uses divination, one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls upon the dead. For whoever does these things is detestable to Yahweh, and because of these detestable things, Yahweh, your God, will drive them out before you. You shall be blameless before Yahweh, your God. So this isn't just Israel, these things. The Canaanites were kicked out of the land in part because of these practices. They're an abomination to God because they bring death, and they're interacting with the spiritual realm, and we're not called to do that other than to pray to the Father. There's safety in that. Somebody said they wish they had a handbook, or they wish there was a handbook for astral projection and all this other stuff. I said, there is a handbook. This one right here says, don't do it. You want to stay safe? Don't do it, because it's not safe. You're messing with demonic entities that you have no idea what you're dealing with, and they are much smarter and much more powerful than we could ever hope to be. Just stay away from them. It's for your safety and your protection, not because God is some kind of cosmic killjoy. It's to protect us. Verse 4. Moreover, I will deliver the Egyptians into the hand of a cruel master, and a mighty king will rule over them, declares Lord Yahweh of hosts. So when Egypt was weakened by this internal conflict, that would be the start of it. Then God would hand them over to a strong foreign power. First, it was Esarhaddon, the king of Assyria, around 670 BC. But then it was Babylon. and then it was the Greeks, and then it was the Romans, and then it was, and on and on and on and on down the line. And they've been handed over to one empire, to one entity after another. But for the Assyrians, cruelty and ferocity was their calling card. They were known for it. Other nations might have been brutal, but the Assyrians took it to a whole nother level. Egypt would never, they would never really recover from this. Even now, I think they think they're a bigger world power than they are. They're a glorified third world country, but they've never recovered to the status that they were in the ancient world as a superpower. But it shows here that God alone has the authority and the power to hand one mighty nation over to another. We read it in Daniel again. He's the one that plants nations. He's the one that plucks them up. He's the one that has authority over all the nations. Yeah, no way we're getting through this whole chapter. It's all right. Verse 5, the waters from the sea will dry up and the river will be parched and dry. Again, drought, famine, it's part of God's judgment. That's a staple of his judgment. It's an identifying factor. First, God attacks their gods. He attacks their spirituality. He attacks their military might. He attacks their economic strength. Egypt's economy was 100% dependent upon the Nile, 100%. Well, you dry up the Nile, and eventually the whole Egyptian economy comes crashing down. They can't do anything. Without the Nile, it's just a desert. Nothing will grow. So the canals will emit a stench, and the streams of Egypt will thin out and dry up, and the reeds and the rushes will rot away. So without, what they counted on each season was where the Nile would flood, it would overflow its banks, and you had all this rich soil, and they could grow all their crops in it and do everything they needed to do with the papyrus and the reeds, and everything was flourishing. But if the Nile stopped flowing to a point where it overflowed its banks and fertilized all the surrounding soil, no hope. It'd be a harsh and uninhabitable desert. And that has been fulfilled, and it will be continued to be fulfilled. And it's interesting, all the attempts that Egypt has taken to circumvent that judgment. I think of the Aswan Dam that was put up in the 60s, and they kept working on the 70s to try to dam up that water to keep it from flowing away from the region where they wanted it to be. And of course, this caused all kinds of problems, up the river to other people. But they're just trying to circumvent God's judgment and find a way using technology to undo what God has called his judgment. There's technology now speaking of undoing judgments, the Tower of Babel, right? When God confused the languages, and you can go to Japan, and you can speak into your phone, where's the nearest Italian restaurant in English? And the phone sends it to a Japanese or interpreter's phone, and they read it in their language, and they can answer back in their language, and it comes to your phone, and you can read it in your language. And it's by technology, again, trying to undo the curse of Babel, when God has really already undone it. He undid it at Pentecost with the gift of tongues for the purpose of sharing God's glory and not man's glory. So again, it's a counterfeit attempt to undo or circumvent God's curses on the world. But this flooding of the Nile, again, it enriches the soil. So when God dried up the Nile, or when he dries up the Nile, these reeds, which were useful in making boats, we talked about those boats in the last chapter, those papyrus reed boats that would float. They were fast. All these things, the rushes, the paper reeds, used to make paper for writing, and therefore it was a commodity for trade, very valuable. Their economy would be crushed. None of this stuff would be able to grow and thrive, and they wouldn't be able to do anything. Once the water dries up, what's left is rancid and it's unable to support life. You know, it's the stench of death. So verse 7, the bulrushes by the Nile, by the edge of the Nile, and all the sown fields by the Nile will become dry, will be driven away, and be no more. Those bulrushes, right? That's where Moses landed in his little basket. He landed in the bulrushes. But where there was once a vitality and where there was once life, replaced by death. You know, and these are all tied in, all associated with the first Exodus as God's judgment upon the Nile, upon Egypt, because they worshiped the Nile. They worshiped the creatures from the Nile. Most of their gods were based on the Nile, the frogs and the crocodiles. They were all Nile based because they saw the Nile as their great provider. They were worshiping the creation instead of the creator. So God levied his judgment upon these objects of their worship to let them know that there is a creator who is sovereign over all these things. Verse 8, and the fishermen will lament, and all those who cast a line into the Nile will mourn, and those who spread nets on the waters will pine away. So again, the fishing industry, another staple of the Egyptian economy, and again, dependent upon the fauna and the flora of the Nile. If the fish don't have anything to eat, the fish aren't staying, and the fish there's nothing to catch. So their food will not grow. No fish, no food, no fish. So that industry would be decimated. So there's another major aspect or major pillar of the Egyptian economy completely decimated. And moreover, verse 9, the manufacturers of linen made from combed flax and the weavers of white cloth will be utterly dejected. So the linen industry, another pillar, staple of the Egyptian economy, depended upon the productivity of the Nile, and would therefore also be stopped cold. With no source of flax, there's no Egyptian linen, you know, and it's still right. Egyptian cotton is still a big thing, but it's still like the best of the best. But with no water, no go. No go, you're done. Your economy is toast. And God can stop it just like that. And the pillars of Egypt will be crushed. All the hired laborers will be grieved in soul. So again, these pillars of the Egyptian economy would crumble. And those who earn their living through these industries are going to see the source of their prosperity completely die up. And it's just the domino effect of that entire society, that entire country just collapsing under the judgment of God. Collapsed from the inside first, and then God just brought it all down on top of itself. So the princes of Zoan are mere fools. The advice of Pharaoh's wisest advisors has become stupid. How can you men say to Pharaoh, I am a son of the wise, a son of ancient kings? So Isaiah is starting a little mocking here. Zoan was the capital of Egypt during the time of the Israelite monarchy. So the northern Delta region was the area, and the advice of Pharaoh's wisest counselors became stupid. You know, even the best of the best had nothing to offer. They makes me kind of think when God's judgment is upon a people. And listen, we saw this in the beginning of Isaiah when he was first starting with Israel. And listen, their wise men will become fools, and they won't have any counselors that can give any kind of wisdom. And we look at the leadership right now in our government, and they're fools. They're just complete fools. You know, just more evidence that this is God's hand of judgment. We have complete incompetence in places of really critical authority. But we know, Paul taught us about this, that it is God who confounds the wisdom of the wisest that the world can offer. The wisest that the world can offer can't come anywhere near to the wisdom of God. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 19. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness before God. For it is written, he is the one who catches the wise in their craftiness. He actually quoted Job 5 there. And again, Yahweh, the Lord, knows the reasonings of the wise, that they are useless. So you see Isaiah saying, just listen to this foolishness that's coming out of your capital city. Listen to this foolishness. Can you believe it? How can you claim any wisdom at all? How can you claim to have any brains when all you're offering is lunacy? It's just craziness. Round, round and round we go. The wheels on the bus go round. But he's clearly mocking and he's taunting this ineffectual wisdom of paganism. They've got nothing to offer. But yet people run to it and they turn to it and they still do. And it's been proven over and over again to be useless and stupid. And they still go to it. Verse 12. Well then, where are your wise men? Please let them tell you and let them understand what Yahweh of hosts has purposed against Egypt. So where are these wise men? Can they shed any light on what Yahweh is going to do with Egypt in the future? Are they able to tell you anything? Rhetorical question. No. Are they able to give any real insight? Another rhetorical question. No. Let's see what they're made of. Here's your chance. Speak up. Let's see what you got. Give us some of your wisdom, please. I want to hear it. They have nothing. They have nothing. And they're not going to have anything. Oh, I got my landlord's dog barking. She's probably barking at me. We have a relationship. I show up and she barks. So the princes of Zoan have acted foolishly, and the princes of Memphis are deluded. Those who are the cornerstone of her tribes have led Egypt astray. So Zoan was the capital. These leaders are just brainless. They have no clue, and they're powerless. In Memphis, which was the prominent political and religious center for northern Egypt, and it was often a base of the operation for many of the pharaohs. These leaders are just under complete delusion. If they think they can stop the coming judgment, they're just out of their minds. They've gone nuts. They're giving their people nothing but false hope. Why is anybody listening to them? These leaders who should have given stability, they weren't able to even stand on their own feet. What do they have to offer? Nothing, especially against God. Nothing. Again, Egypt is exposed as powerless and useless. Verse 14, Yahweh has mixed within her a spirit of distortion. They have led Egypt astray in all that it does, as a drunken man staggers in his vomit. So pretty graphic. I think I know I can relate. I've been there, staggering around in my day. Get up and do it again. Brainless. Yahweh has confused the minds of the leaders so that no one could do anything about what was to come. Nothing. And they didn't have any wisdom or knowledge or anything to impart regarding any of it. They rendered completely useless. It's like staggering drunks. They're just mired in their own vomit. All they can do is circle around and hope to remain standing upright and lean on something. That's the picture of the leadership of Egypt. And God says, listen, I did this. This was a harmful spirit that was sent by Yahweh. He did this to them. he made them loco. He gave them to do, and we've seen him do it. We saw him do it to King Saul in 1 Samuel 6 when Saul became rebellious. I'm just going to send an evil spirit upon you, and he's going to torment you. And you're going to have to call on David to come and play music for you to even have any hope of retaining any kind of sanity at all. And then in 1 Kings 22, which is one of my favorite stories in the Bible, Ahab is gone, and he's the king of Judah. Jehoshaphat has gone to meet with Ahab, and they're going to try to team up against the Syrians. And so Ahab tricks Jehoshaphat or convinces him to go with him, and Jehoshaphat says, "Well, aren't there any prophets of the Lord? Somebody that can tell us the truth of what's going on here?" Because all of Ahab's 400 prophets were all like the name it and claim it guys. And just declare your victory and speak it into existence and all this crap that we hear in the church still today. And Joseph says, "Don't you have a real prophet around?" And Ahab says, "Well, there's one guy, but man, I hate that guy. He never says anything good." I might be that guy because sometimes it thinks I don't have anything good to say. Do something good and I'll have something good to say. So they bring in Micaiah, and the whole story, and Ahab ends up dying, and it's a great story. But we see this picture of God's heavenly council, right? He's got his supernatural council, the divine council, and they're gathered around, and God's like, "All right, boys, how are we going to do this?" And God's getting ideas. It's not like he needs them to counsel him, but he's given them some opportunity. And one finally says, "Hey, I got it. I'll be a lying spirit in the mouths of his prophets." And God's like, "Yeah, I like that one. I like that one. Go and do it. Go and do it." So none of his prophets were able to speak the truth. God initiated the whole thing as judgment against Ahab, but God started it. Oh boy. Yep. So verse 15, "There will be no work for Egypt, which its head or tail, its palm branch or bulrush may do." So this is the same sequence we saw in chapter 9 when God was proclaiming judgment upon Israel. 9:14. "So Yahweh cuts off head and tail from Israel, both palm branch and bulrush in a single day." This is the MO of God's judgment when he hands it down. Yeah. So again, we see this metaphor representing political and religious elite. Nobody can hold back what God initiates. Nobody's got the power to stop what he has started. They're not going to be able to do anything about it. We'll keep going. Verse 16. It kind of starts a new section. It looks like we were dealing with probably immediate judgment upon Egypt, and now we shift to the eschatological judgment, the day that Jesus returns, because 5 times now between 16 and 25, we see that same phrase that I talked about last week, and probably many times, "in that day," in that day. So it's pointing to the parousia, the return of Christ, the day of Yahweh. So verse 16, "In that day, the Egyptians will become like women, and they will tremble and be in dread because of the waving of the hand of Yahweh of hosts, which he is going to wave over them." So this is a prophetic announcement of the coming day of Yahweh. And he said they will be like women. In other words, this was intended to be a mocking and insulting statement. It's like, you say this, "Oh, you hit like a girl." Like they're just not as physically strong. But it was a mocking thing, especially in that culture. If they saw women showing up for battle, they would just laugh. They would just laugh. But we see this foolishness now with this transgender stuff and these these biological men competing in women's sports because they identify as a woman, and they're just beating the heck out of these girls in these wrestling and contact sports, and crushing their records in running and doing weightlifting and all these things just because they're physically, biologically stronger. So he's invoking these gender stereotypes again to cause Egypt to question their confidence in their military strength. You're not going to be able to fight against this. You're not going to be able to stop it. There's nothing you can do. Nahum, there's a nice, see if I can even find it. Nahum chapter 3. It's after Micah. Nahum 3, or Nahum 3:13, is similar. It says, behold, your people are women in your midst. The gates of your land are open wide to your enemies. Fire consumes your gate bars. Again, it's just this picture of hopelessness against this coming judgment. There's going to be nothing you can do. You can't fight this. So to stand, again, they won't be able to stand here when Judah. So things have changed now because Judah has become the dominant force in the world. So we're looking at the millennial reign of Christ now. This has changed, a change of scenario, change of scenery, change of time frame. And Judah will be under the uplifted hand or the strength of Yahweh of hosts. So the tables have turned now on Egypt. Egypt was the oppressor, and now they're on the other end of the short end of the stick. Yeah, I should probably just stop. I'll probably start again in 16 next week. That's a good place to pick up, but it's just about 8 o'clock. So that was pretty good. So next week is the 11th. We made it through. No crashes, no shenanigans. So any thoughts or questions, corrections, Rotten Tomatoes?
No.
Hit a Rotten Tomatoes button.
So the whole essence is about God being worshipped first. He's the only God. And throughout the whole Bible, that's the whole theme. You don't
Yeah.
worship God, you get judgment. You don't
That's right.
take care of God first. That's the whole Bible theme.
Essentially, yeah. Yeah, and we see it played out over and over again. There's this one thing called, and you can see it in Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 and 9. It's this Deuteronomy 32 worldview, and it's looking back to these rebellions against God, these serial rebellions against God. So we had the first rebellion in the garden, and then we had the judgment, which resulted in judgment, and then we had Noah's flood, which was the result of continuous rebellion. And then we've got the Tower of Babel after the flood. And when the nations again were continually in rebellion against God, and the Tower of Babel is looked at as this attempt to build this ziggurat where they could worship the host of heaven, where they could get into astrology, where they were worshiping all the gods, the small g gods, the demonic entities who were posing as gods. And they were rejecting Yahweh. So God said, okay, at the Tower of Babel, if that's what you want, that's what you got. They're going to rule over you. But then right after that, he selected Abraham, and he said, I'm going to plant you here in the land of Canaan, and this is my portion. This is my land. So he started this thing with Abraham, like planting a seed, and then with the intent of over time that this would grow. And when Jesus came, and died on the cross and sent his apostles and therefore his church on this mission to start taking back that which was lost, that which was given over to these other, the Old Testament calls them Elohim. They're supernatural beings, but they're not they're created beings and not the creator. And John talks about that in his epistle. God has given over, he's given authority to the demonic forces in certain areas, geographic areas. Paul talks about it. Our battle isn't against flesh and blood, but powers and principalities and rulers of darkness in high places. We saw it in Daniel. I remember Gabriel came to help Daniel and says, well, I got to go. I was held up by the Prince of Persia. This is, an entity over a geographic region. So a lot of times, if you've been in an area long enough and you know its history, you can see these patterns repeating themselves over and over again. It's because there are demonic entities in a region operating in the same way. So like I was in the church in East Killingly, and you read the history, and I bet similar, Maureen, at Goshen Hill, you can see these patterns repeating themselves over and over again of things that tear apart the church.
Right.
These conflicts, you see it over and over again, and it's over the same thing almost all the time, because it's the same entity that's influencing the people and spreading their venom and their garbage, and people get sucked into that. So that's that Deuteronomy 32 worldview that, listen, there are spiritual entities who have some authority that's been given to them by God. But then you read Psalm 82, and it's God judging them and saying, you're going to die like men. You're going into the lake of fire. You're going into the pit. You're done. Because you've gone, again, beyond what I've allowed you to do. You've been wicked. You've been oppressive. You've done evil. And now you're going to die. So we see a lot of these things, and a lot of these judgments. While economic and military things are judged, we also see God judging their gods, their spiritualism, their worship, their temples, and God directly opposing and attacking them and showing them to be useless and no real power at all other than what God has allowed them to have. So we see it. That's what happened in Egypt at the Exodus with the plagues. God was attacking their gods. He's attacking their gods here. He attacks the gods of the Babylonians. He's attacking all the, Israel went into judgment because of their idolatry and worshiping other gods, and God's attacking all of them and showing them as completely impotent and useless and no gods at all. So Isaiah brings this up a lot. At one point Isaiah says, look, you people are idiots. You take a tree, you cut it down, and then you cut it in half. And one half, you chop it up into pieces and you cook your food over it. And the other half, you carve it into an image and say, this is my God, and you worship it. How stupid can you be? And people are stupid. Anything but submitting to God, because there's accountability there. And our pride is affected. And that's at the root of all of it. It's pride. It's human pride. You went and got me started.
I just said one thing.
You touched the nerve. But when you start seeing these things, it starts to make even more sense, and the Bible really starts coming to life more and more and more
Right.
as we see these things and we understand the cultural context of what's happening.
Mhm.
Well, I never used to understand why God was always angry with his people. I mean, I read the Bible once and God was angry. And you read it again, I'm like, oh, now I know why he's angry, because
Yeah.
they were going somewhere else. They didn't serve him.
They're adulterers, essentially.
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys, but if my spouse cheats on me, I'm going to be pretty mad.
Yeah, yeah,
People are going to die.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And God's the same thing. You don't cheat on me. I'm be faithful to me, and everything will go well for you.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
But if you're not, then this is going to happen.
Mhm.
And he warns everybody ahead of time. He doesn't
Mhm.
do anything that he hasn't announced through his prophets first.
Right.
But
Right.
people still won't respond and submit to him. But his terms of surrender are pretty clear.
Yep.
Come to Jesus, or
Or,
into the pit.
There you go.
yeah.
Yikes. Good question.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Good study.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's good. I
We
love
have
this.
thoroughly enjoyed this. You have no idea how happy we're here to be here with
Well, I'm
you.
happy you're here too. I'm happy everybody's here. We've got our own little family going on here on Wednesday
We
night,
do, we
Wednesday
do.
night group. Hope it grows. So anyway, let's pray. Father, I just thank you. I thank you for these brothers and sisters, Father. I thank you for Jean and Frank and Joanna and Maureen and Jimmy and Carol and Paul, who sometimes come on, and Colette, who will probably watch later, and anybody who watches. Father, I just pray that you would continue to bless us, draw us nearer to you through the study of your word. Help us to just gain a greater understanding and therefore just more effectively worship you in spirit and truth. So we thank you for this time. I pray that you watch over us, watch over our families, Father, and just continue to fill us with your spirit and empower us, strengthen our hands for the work you've called us to. We thank you, Father. We praise you in Jesus' name. Amen.
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 All right.
Amen.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank
Oh,
you.
my pleasure. God bless you guys.
See you next
too.
week.
See you next
You
week.
got it.
Hmm.
See you Sunday, Mo.
See ya Sunday. Bye.
Adios.